The history of the Janissaries is full of action, adventures and excitement. Surely, men like the Janissaries determined history without any influence from the outside. Or could it be that they were only pebbles moved by the waves of something greater? There was an occurrence that had a big impact on the Janissaries as well as the Ottoman Empire in general, and it happened on the other side of the globe. To understand how it came to affect the Janissaries, we need to dedicate this episode to a short lesson in economics. This segment is absolutely essential to understand what happened in Europe and also in the Ottoman Empire in the 16th and 17th century. I will try to make this segment as short and understandable as possible. Suppose two people, Alex and Bob, own two different things. Alex has a loaf of bread and Bob has some beef. Now suppose the situation that Alex would rather have the beef while Bob prefers the bread. What would be a sensible action for both of them? Correct, they exchange their possessions. Both receive what they want and only have to give up something they value less. We can enhance this consideration by adding a third person, Charlie. Now, Alex wants some beef but despises fish. Bob wants fish but hates bread. And Charlie wants good bread but would never dare to touch beef. Everyone can improve his situation by shifting his property to the person who demands it. This means that not only does anyone not lose, but everyone wins. But what if Bob is not available? Maybe he sits hundreds of miles away. Or he only wants to do this trade in 3 years in the future. How could we resolve the situation? It would be much easier if Alex could just give his good to any random person as long as this person is willing to give him some gratification in return that satisfies Alex and that would satisfy the demands of everyone else. If such a unit of gratification existed, Alex could simply give his good to someone for, let's say, 3 units of gratification. Alex does not necessarily need to sell to Bob or Charlie for that matter. Alex can sell it to any random person who values Alex's good so much that he is willing to pay him an amount that exceeds the value that Alex sees in his original property. And as soon Alex meets a person, for example Charlie, who offers the good he wants, Alex can offer him his units of gratification in exchange. Like in the original trading relationship, everyone wins, since neither Alex nor Bob nor Charlie would commit to a transaction in which they would lose. Now we have to find a thing that really exists, that can take the role of our unit of gratification. Something that would be accepted by anyone as a medium for any exchange whatsoever. For instance, we could use bread. Everyone needs that. But bread does have some obvious shortcomings. Wait 1 week and it does not seem so useful anymore. Over the course of human history, many commodities took the role of medium of exchange. For example, cacao beans, seashells and so on. In the end, it was gold and silver that proved to be of the most use for this purpose. Gold and silver became the generally accepted medium of exchange, or in other words, money. Reconsider the trades we discussed before. Receiving a good you want is the nice part of the trade. The annoying part is creating something and selling it to someone who values it in order to get the means to buy something you want. The creative duty on your part can be circumvented by stealing, blackmailing or some other kind of crime. But, of course, this is a kind of behavior that would annoy your counterparties immensely and might not end very well for you. It would be much nicer to create such a unit of gratification, in our case gold or silver, out of thin air and give it to your counterparty. The trade partner would not notice the difference of your piece of gold or silver to an already existing one. For silver and gold, the only way known to humankind to create it is mining, but this is very costly and you have to find a deposit at first. Now, what will be the effect if by some miracle someone finds a way to create additional units of silver anyway? In our scenario, aside from some relatively rare applications, silver is mostly used as a medium of exchange. That means that it has mostly worth because it can be used for exchange. Money is needed for exchanges and at any point in time there are only so much money available. In other words, this is demand and supply. Both fit together when money has a certain price, that is purchasing power. When additional units of money are introduced, this price, the purchasing power, has to change. Since the amount of money the supply just increased, its purchasing power has to fall in order to fit the demand for money again. The result is, the silver, for example, has less worth, which is equivalent to higher prices. Please note that we can only say something about the direction of the change in purchasing power, but nothing about the exact value of this change. And now back to the Ottoman Empire and the new threat that came from the other side of the world. Every little child knows that Columbus discovered America. Less people know that it was in 1492, and nearly no one knows about the curse it brought with it. This curse is such an interesting topic that I'm thinking about making a whole video on it. The curse started when the European conquerors, foremost the Spanish, found precious metals in their new colonies in the Americas and started to bring them to Europe since they were, well, precious. However, they did not realize that they brought more with them than gold and silver. No, I'm not talking about syphilis. Neither am I talking about some natural curse. What they brought with them was an experiment in money, and this actually led to one of the first serious attempts on economic theory through the school of Salamanca. The Spaniards did not have to invest very much for these precious metals. The Incas and Aztecs did not use it for money, and therefore it had little worth for them. Or the conquistadors simply nicked it anyway. The production cost of the new money was therefore very low, and so it was easy to bring it to Europe. Barrett gathered data on the gold production in the world in the 16th, 17th and 18th century. The chart tells us everything we need to know. The productions of precious metals in the Americas dwarfed every other mining operation in the world. The 16th century, with only 3/4 of the precious metal, is actually the weakest century in this series. Now we know where the gold and silver came from. Let's find out what happened with it. As a reference point for the influx of gold and silver, we can look at Spain. Chan, Palmer and Ward went to lengths to calculate the money supply from 1492 to 1800, although for our purpose I only show the data until 1700. The money supply does not only include the gold imported from America, but also imports from other areas like Africa, domestic production as well as money flowing out. We can see that the money supply nearly quadrupled in the 16th century. Until the 17th century, it increased nearly 8-fold. In this time, the money supply grew by approximately 1.16% per year. That does not sound much, but let's reconsider the graph about the gold production. We see that the new gold from the Americas dwarfed the production in the rest of the world in every century. This means that the increase, which seems modest at first, is actually absurdly high when put into perspective. Now, please take a moment and consider the first part of this video, which was all about the economics of money supply. Guess what happened? Exactly, like a wave, a price increase swept across Europe and finally reached the Ottoman Empire. Murphy gives an example of inflation furthered by logistical problems on a campaign at Shirvan in today's Azerbaijan in 1578. Since the average garrison soldier's daily wage was fixed at 5 akçes, the effect of such price inflation was to transform the purchase price of the average soldier's daily bread ration into the equivalent of a month and a half's wages. Yes, what is described here is an extreme case. The prices discussed here were also influenced by the extreme circumstances. Pamuk provides better data. He calculated a price index for Istanbul and comes to the following conclusion. As a whole, they indicate that prices in Istanbul increased by approximately 500% from the end of the 15th to the end of the 17th century. Considering modern day's currency, a quintupling in prices over a century is nothing enormous, although saying it aloud makes it sound very strange. However, centuries ago, such price increases were not common. Pamuk did his calculations and produced a chart on the prices, but since he did not provide the underlying data, I decided to show the numbers provided by Özmuzur instead. Here's the development of prices in Istanbul from 1500 to 1700. You can see that they went up throughout the 16th century. Compare this to the wages in the same time period. They even went down. Combining both developments makes clear how difficult the situation became, and in the middle of it all sat the Janissaries, living off a meager 2 akçe a day. An ordinary peasant could only react to such changes by starving to death. But the Janissaries had another option. We will discuss this soon. For now, we can describe the dire situation of the empire with the words of Barkon. The 16th century came to an end with the countries of the Ottoman Middle East falling into grave economic and social crisis, which presaged a decisive turning point in their history. This made me think about the specific aspect of monetary inflation. Unfortunately, the researchers discussing the Ottoman Empire in the 16th century do not talk about it at all. I am referring to an economic law, the Cantillon effect. The Cantillon effect states that actors in an economy experience price increases differently. Whoever can spend the new money first draws the biggest advantage out of it, since the price signal has not yet reached the economy. Therefore, the seller cannot take the increased money supply into account and sell his goods too cheaply. The earlier buyer of goods buys at the low and the later buyer at high prices. For example, in Spain the order could have been: the Spanish king and therefore the Spanish state received the shipments of gold and silver directly. Although they probably were the wealthiest institutions in the kingdom, they could spend the new bullion first, and very often they gave some goodies to the aristocrats to buy their loyalty. Thereby the wealth trickled down to the Spanish nobility, which was already among the richest institutions in the kingdom. But this made them even richer, and they spent it and thereby passed it on to Spanish merchants. Depending on their order in the economic hierarchy, they could already experience a rise in prices, which made them a bit poorer, but it became really tough for the peasants. The new money reached them last, and therefore all the prices had risen more than their wealth. The already wrecked peasantry grew even poorer. What does the Cantillon effect mean for the Ottoman Empire in special? The silver from the Americas came to Europe at its almost western point. From there it spread across Europe through trade relations. From very early on, the Ottomans were embedded in an international trade network that existed even before the empire came into being. Pamuk tells us which goods were traded. In the 13th century, the merchants of the Eastern Mediterranean and the Europeans carried both the silk and spices of Asia, as well as the locally produced commodities of the Near East to Europe, in return for some European goods and considerable quantities of silver. While goods moved from east to west, mostly bullion and specie was handed over in return for them. With the silver wandering eastwards, so did the price increase. From all the empires in Europe, the increase in money supply reached the Ottomans at the latest point. According to the Cantillon effect, they should have gotten the worst of it. We can obtain more information by looking at Brodbury, who provides data on average prices measured in silver all over Europe. The result does not support my hypothesis. We clearly see that the prices in Istanbul always stayed well below all other regions in Europe. Nevertheless, this is empiricism, and therefore on its own not a sound economic argument, which makes me trust Cantillon's law more. Other things could have offset the price increases. Maybe Istanbul had more price controls in place which lowered the prices but led to shortages in return. This could very well be. According to the literature, the Ottoman markets were notoriously regulated. A multitude of other factors could have played their part. And this is a good place to stop and take a look at what we learned today. A trade is a mutual beneficial exchange relationship. To make trade easier, over time some goods usually become money. That is, the commonly accepted medium of exchange. In the long term, usually gold and silver take this role because of their properties. But gold and silver became problematic when the Europeans started to colonize the whole world and began mining there. The gold and silver from the new sources dwarfed the existing production, and suddenly the amount of available money increased drastically. Thereby, a unit of gold or silver became less valuable in trade. When the inflated money supply swept over Europe, a tide of price increases followed. The tide hit hard, especially the Janissaries, whose meager payment for soldiering became valueless. Additionally, many of them were small craftsmen and artisans, which were vulnerable too. We will discover in the following episodes how the Janissaries reacted to this problem. And now it is your turn again. What do you think? Following economic law, it does make sense that, at least in Europe, the inflation hit the Ottomans the hardest. Do you know some literature discussing the Cantillon effect with respect to international trade? Tell me in the comments. Please do not forget to like, share and subscribe. So long, we'll meet again soon. Stay critical, stay curious, stay free.